talk to us a little bit more about why drones. Your career didn't necessarily need to take this turn, but I'd love to hear just,
Exactly.
some of the thought process and your experience over the years and how you're an entrepreneur or a dronepreneur, as some would say. So talk to us just a little bit about how that all happened.
Well, it was kind of funny because we had a city council member who was in charge of the Hollywood Hills, and his area was getting bombarded by drones flying around the Hollywood sign. And there were a number of residents that continued to complain about it. And he basically threw his hands up and went to the police department and said, make it stop. So what can we do? So we started looking into the area. The city attorney was tasked with coming up with an ordinance, and they reached out to Air Support as the technical expert, and that was me. Got assigned to work with our city attorney to craft a municipal code that would not be preemptive with federal rules and regulations that we could use to enforce drone use in the city of Los Angeles. So I started on the counter drone side, I guess, but just around the same time, a lot of people know that LAPD inherited or got or acquired Seattle's drones, the Dragonfly 6s, and we were thinking about starting a program. So at the same time all of this was going on, and I was actually prepping to go on a court case having to do with one of the drones taken in custody, I thought I better get up to speed if I'm going to have to testify in court. So I figured, started looking into it, started flying it. And then since I heard we were getting Seattle's, I spent my free time going, okay, what actually makes an aviation program, and how can I build an aviation program using UAS as my base platform? So I started building it out from there. And then I joined with a nonprofit, and I was teaching that course with the nonprofit for a while. But then they wanted to diversify and go into other things, and I wanted to concentrate on just the drone space. So I basically branched out on my own and came up with tactical drone concepts and brought all my stuff. And the courses are actually post-certified, which is police officer standards and training in the state of California. So we've done that, and we've expanded on a long list of stuff.
Sure. Yeah, I want to hear about those courses in a second, but talk to us about Seattle. So the Seattle Police Department gave the LAPD a fleet of drones, or how did that?
Back around the 2015, 2016 timeframe, before that, drones are fairly well accepted now, at least in my opinion. But back then, there was a lot of pushback, a lot of the perception that when you say drone, you're talking a predator flying over the city 24/7, spying on people. So the whole surveillance attitude that comes with a drone was like, okay, no, not here. And Seattle was one of those places. They went and acquired they were Dragonfly 6s at the time. They acquired those, and then the public found out after the fact and said, no, not here. So they were sitting on a shelf somewhere in Seattle, and LAPD became interested in using drones. And in our bureau that Air Support belongs to, they said, okay, bureau chief said, we'll take them, we'll build something out, but he wasn't going to do it before he got the public approbation behind it to start it. So as we waited and waited and waited to get that public approbation, ours actually sat in the Inspector General's office under lock and key. And then by the time we got around to getting the city support for use of the drones, the aircraft themselves were kind of antiquated. And a funny story about that, I was talking to a person by the name Ben Miller. He was working with Dragon, and I was like, well, could we get some kind of a trade or anything else? And to tell you technology-wise how old those were, he's like, well, there's two of those. One of those is in our corporate office. The other one is in the Dayton Air Museum. So there's not a whole lot of value to those drones. So we went out and acquired new ones.
What do you think the factor was in the public kind of turnaround there? I mean, I wouldn't think that Southern California is that different culturally from Seattle. I know it is, but like comparatively to even the East Coast or Texas,
similar attitudes, and once again, basic public comfort with seeing drones in Best Buy, seeing them flying all over the place. They're becoming commonplace, so it's not that big of a deal where they don't think of a military drone at this point. And when the public sees it, that's like, oh, my kid wants to get one of those. So it's not as intimidating. It's not as like, and there's beginning to be an understanding that the thing's only going to fly for 20 to 40 minutes tops. So what's going to happen? And so the way we were able to overcome that is basically a strong policy, very limited use scope for us. It's tactical. It's dangerous situations as opposed to search and rescue. When you go down that road, there are strict guidelines for its use to where the public becomes comfortable with operations.
So talk to us a little bit more about your courses. So you've been teaching at InterDrone for years now.
Yes.
What do you think that the shift has been, kind of those early days, what people were interested in learning? I mean, what's remained the same? What are the questions people go back to? So just kind of tell us what your course structure is and how that's changed over the years.
Well, I started my first course was an 8-hour overview of UAS operations so that agencies could make a determination, is a UAS program right for me? And that was the very first one that I did. And then I built it out and I took the basically UAS as an aviation program idea, put that into a week-long course where you have a month build up to take your 107 test, and then you take your 107 test, and then you do safety, you do operations, do training, and basically certify that you can fly a drone. Currently, we're using the NIST standard for our training program, but I've then built out from that an advanced tactics course where you get into the tactical aspects of flying, which I've actually revised some of the original core competencies to include some of those, because what I'm finding is new aviators are way too reliant on the automation of the aircraft. So they need to go back to the basics. And I actually I use this Loki aircraft because it doesn't hold, it doesn't do anything. And I like to use it and as a fun activity, play around nine rounds of golf, trying to move this from pad to pad. But all too often people forget, it's like, hey, that automation won't always be there for you. One of my very first students, 2 days after they left the course, emailed me and said, hey, I'm glad we went through that, because he flew underneath power lines and he lost his GPS and it started to move uncontrolled. And he's like, hey, what's going on? And he didn't until he figured it out. And it's like, yeah, we practiced flying without GPS. It's like, oh yeah. But a lot of these aircraft I'm assuming the legal aspects, they want the control, so they're not allowing the aircraft to go into basically a manual mode. So you have to get creative to find a way for students to actually learn how to fly first, because too many people are learning how to manage a drone flight as opposed to fly the aircraft. And you got to remember to fly the aircraft.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this with the SkyDo 2, where sometimes it's too good at its automation that people don't realize it shouldn't be used in specific use cases where you know it could be kind of dangerous, or there would be a legal liability of you not actually being in control And as far as SkyDo is concerned by the paperwork, you're responsible for it. So
yeah, and it's SkyDo is probably the great hope for American drone manufacturing, at least as it stands right now. But yeah, I do have concerns if I do not have total control of the aircraft and the automation is following an algorithm to bank right or left. There may be reasons why you don't want to overfly whatever's on the left and it's saying to go that way. So it becomes an issue.
yeah, well, I guess if you educate the users which drones to use in which use case, which piloting mode to engage with, there's not really a concern. But yeah, that's what training's for, right?
Exactly.
Anthony, is there a particular vertical within the industry that you see have the most interest in taking your courses, or just is it pretty kind of do you work with a lot of pilots from a lot of different verticals?
I would say 90% of the verticals are all public safety. It's basically I'm able to understand what those, and let me back up a second and say that for me, it comes back to figuring out what you want to do with the aircraft. So what I tell people is come up with your pre-scripted mission sets, what missions you actually want to run, and then work your way backwards to learn how to do that. For the public safety verticals, that's basically where my strengths are there, and military applications. So we can walk through how to clear a building, how to search around a house, how to get in those really tight spaces, how to use the aircraft as an advantage, and ways around the time limits of the aircraft, working through those problems from a public safety standpoint is basically what we walk through in the advanced tactics course. And then also I would say most of these drone operators in public safety, at least on the law enforcement side, are also going to be the guys that get asked the questions on the counter drone side. So they have to be the technical as well as tactical experts in the drone space. So they have all the legal answers when somebody comes, hey, is this a criminal or at least a regulatory violation, when the other officers ask. And that's the hardest thing to impart to other officers, because cops want black and white, yes or no. Is it a crime? Is it not a crime? There are so many gray areas right now in the drone space that, well, is he operating model recreation? Does he have a 107 license? What's he doing? And it's like confuses people really quick, especially if they're not in the industry.
What are some of the most common questions you get from pilots who are taking their courses and who are kind of taking their first dive into the drone?
I get two big ones all the time, probably about equally. The first one is, what drone do I buy? Well, okay, I can't tell you because it goes back to those pre-scripted mission sets.
That's what you're doing.
Yeah. So initially, it seemed like the industry was going toward a one-size-fits-all, where they wanted one drone that's going to do all these missions. And for me, it just didn't seem like it was working out. So you need to specialize. If you're predominantly going to do say interior missions, then you need a smaller aircraft as opposed to a larger aircraft. You're going to need some kind of lighting. You're going to or thermal capability, and then that narrows your scope on what you're going to buy. And then the other big thing that narrows everybody's scope is, how much money do you have? Because the city budget and or the people that are donating to your program, you have a finite amount of money for that. So I can't tell you until you tell me what you want to do with it. And then the other big question that's asked all the time, especially in my vertical, is, okay, do we fly 107 or do we fly under the public use rules? And the easy answer to that is there is no downside to doing both. So get your 107 license. The public knows that you have the same training and experience that their neighbor does when they see their neighbor flying their drone. But under the public use rules, you may have certain exemptions or leeway to do other types of things. If you go back a little ways to use to get an emergency authorization, you had to have a public use COA. That's no longer the case. You can get your SGI, special government interest emergency exception under 107 or public use, but there's no downside to having both. So I recommend to everybody get both.
So what areas of commercial UAS regulation do you think are important for the FAA to kind of provide clarity on? And how do you think that those kind of insights tie into progress in the industry in the United States? Are we kind of being held back here? I have the feeling that people in every country say that about their civil aviation authority, but I do feel like it is a little bit truer here because we have such a safety record to defend.
Okay. The answer to that is yes. With necessity, yes, they're holding things back. But the biggest thing is this beyond visual line of sight. Because from a technical aspect, I want to stay behind cover as a public safety guy and throw the drone somewhere where I can't see it. Because if I can see the drone, probably the suspect can see me. And if he can see me, he can shoot me. So technically, I'm beyond visual line of sight. And the FAA agrees, if you can't see the drone, you're beyond visual line of sight. So trying to get an operation where you're no higher than the crest of a building and you're turning the corner, the chances of you interfering in the national airspace are extremely limited. So the risk calculus there is so low that it's like, come on, if I'm telling you in my request for a waiver that I'm going to stay below the crest of the building, you still have a problem with that? But they're working it, and actually drone responders is, which is another.
Charles did a webinar with us recently.
Yep, they're working on that issue, working with the FAA to get that resolved. So that may be coming soon. But there are little issues like that. I would probably use personally the SGI route. If you have a low cloud layer and you don't have your 500-foot separation, it's like, okay, so you're not going to launch on an armed suspect because you don't have cloud clearance. It's like, come on. Okay, so I got a call for an SGI. That should be something that if I can maintain visual contact or have beyond visual line of sight, we're talking low clearing missions. And I think that's probably where a lot of the disconnect comes in. The FAA doesn't understand our role and mission, just like we don't understand their role and mission in guarding the national airspace as much as we should.
Yeah, there's just even listening to you kind of go through your examples. There's so much nuance in that is really down to the trade. Right. And it's not just public safety kind of circumstances they have to think of. They have to think of oil and gas. They have to think of tower.
Yes.
And for example, proximity to tower, there was some regulation that Nate early on had kind of helped steer away from going in the wrong direction because it would have limited all inspections of tower, period.
Yeah.
So I think the more the FAA is informed of that, the better. But there is, we're just thinking about a volume issue, the amount of comments that came in on the NPRM for remote ID. Somebody's got to weed through all of that. And, there's limited resources for how much they can contemplate. And I think that's kind of been some of the cause behind the no answers to things. And it's not wanting to strangle the future by putting something on paper.
I mean, kind of segue in, some of the frustration also in the public safety community comes from the fact that I'm not advocating doing this, by the way, but just understand that in the manned aviation community, you can fly public use in a helicopter and you never have to apply for a COA. You could just say, I'm government use, jump in a helicopter and go fly. So why are there over regulations where you got to get a COA to operate public use with a drone?